Thanks, everyone. Again, this is our Sandeep sixth or seventh. Now, this till the time Sandeep start presenting, I'm talking Sandeep as a organizer for this group. We will switch the role. Um, so I think Sandeep, this is our seventh actually. This our the URL says there seventh. Good.
Yep.
So we started back in June or July, and one we did with the in person as well, with the help of our friend who is here, with Scott, which was great. And hopefully, we will probably bring more hybrid kind of stuff in next year. So today, of course, Sandeep is presenting, and that's why we are all here to. When he says notebook, I get scared, and when I see notebook anywhere, the Sandeep's picture come in front of me. So he's presenting today, so this is awesome. Um, Quickly, my name is Pravinder Chana. I know a lot of you guys are already joined us the previous event. So I'm in Vancouver actually, and I tried to start this meetup a few years ago, but now when we moved to Portland, we just started on this one, and it's called Vancouver Fabric and Power BI User Group. But usually there's only 5-10% people from Vancouver. Most of people are from all over the place, which is always good to see. And about me, I run my own consulting company very focused on Power BI and now so-called Fabric and anything data, basically all Microsoft data platform stuff. That's pretty much what I do. I enjoy doing all this stuff, and of course, I'm an MVP. It's almost 6 years now, and hopefully, we can continue on that. Sandeep, as the organizer, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. I don't think Parvinder we need any introduction here. It's pretty much the our friendly crowd here, the regulars. But if any of you are new, well, I'm Sandeep Pawar. I am also an MVP. Been part of the community, Fabric and Power BI community for a long time. I write blog at fabric.guru and I work at Hitachi Solutions as a senior Power BI architect. And I am a co-organizer of the Vancouver Fabric and Power BI user group. So, yeah, I mean, this all came about. Parvinder and I were talking, what should we do end of the year? If we initially our thought was maybe some sort of a table chat and then just go over maybe the highlights of the year and more of a community discussion rather than a presentation. Um, but then our he and I started talking about notebooks and and we said, okay, let's do a session on notebooks. Who doesn't like notebooks? So that's where I guess this session started, or at least the idea of this session started. And if you followed me on socials, or if you followed me my blog, you probably know how much I like notebooks. You may have probably muted me as well at this point because I talk way too much about notebooks. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, looking forward to some cool stuff today. Um, so again, we will record this. I think I mentioned that I usually try to be as soon as Teams tell me the recording is available, I pretty much try to post it as soon as possible. I know a lot of people cannot join, and so it will be available. And um, please keep yourself muted and raise your hands up if you wanted to. Sandeep, I think, would not mind interrupting during his presentation. So yeah, go ahead and ask your questions. And please, if you're putting on a chat, prefix your question with Q. I will be probably doing the moderation today because Sandeep is presenting. So I will try to take the questions and we'll get the answer from Sandeep. And we have a Q&A also turned on Teams. People still don't use that much, but I think if we use that, that will be easier. Well, Sandeep, it's yours now. Take on.
Yep. Thank you, Pravinder. So as Parvinder mentioned, that if you have any questions, so I won't be seeing the chat, but feel free to interrupt, raise your hand. Some of you who, like me, who are not able to use the chat, go ahead and unmute yourself or raise your hand, whatever you feel comfortable doing. But you won't be interrupting me. In fact, I would prefer that if you have a question, just go ahead and ask the question, so we can keep it interactive. The session that I planned here is also very informal because I didn't want to do the whole thing about with all the deck and everything. My goal here, the session title is Fabric Notebooks for Power BI developers. And the idea is really many of you who are Power BI developers like me, and then maybe have not and are now using Fabric, and then maybe you have not had much exposure to notebooks before, or maybe you're using notebooks, but maybe to not to an extent where you would know all the details or the features of what exists in Fabric. So my goal today is to show you some of those features. We will look at the anatomy of Fabric notebooks. Like first, we'll go over what are the notebooks, what are different settings, what those settings do, things that may not be obvious to you. Then we'll go into semantic link labs, another one of my favorite topics. As a Power BI developer, how you can use that, and how I use it personally on a or professionally on a day-to-day basis. Then we'll look into Python versus PySpark. So there are two, or not even two, there are multiple versions or flavors of notebooks. So we'll look into what is the difference between the two, how can you think about it, maybe create some sort of a mental model. When can you choose or when should you choose one over the other? What are the advantages, disadvantages? How can you go from one to the other? So that's one of the blogs. In fact, I have planned. I'll be publishing that tomorrow. But you're the lucky folks. You'll get to see it today. How you can go from Python notebook to PySpark notebooks. And then lastly, orchestration. So I won't go into super detail about orchestration piece of it, but if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask the question or let me know. So let's get
Yes, Sandeep,
started.
you're gonna, sorry, share your screen, right?
I will. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So I am in Fabric now, and I have a workspace, Fabric so many little Fabric Power BI user group, which is where we'll be working on some of the stuff. So without much wait here, let's just go ahead and launch a notebook. And when I launch a notebook, the very first thing that you will see, and what I want to do is maybe let me see if I can turn on Zoom it. Let's see if it is working. Yep. Zoom it is working. So what I want to do first is maybe go from left to right and then maybe top to bottom. And then we can just start looking at what are some of the features within Fabric that you should be aware of. So when I first go to the very top at the in the first row, we have home. And under home, we have save as, pretty self-explanatory, which is the save as button. It doesn't work as expected, in my opinion. So it does save as, but then if you have folders, it just lands when you do the save as, it just lands that notebook or saves the notebook in that workspace, but doesn't let you choose any folder that you want to land it in. There is include built-in resources, and we'll talk about that. What does that mean? Then there is a download button. When you click on download, you'll see multiple different options, which is IPyYNB. Um, IPy is the IPython, PY is Python, NB is the notebook, and this comes from Jupyter Notebook. So if you worked with notebooks before, and if you're familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, that's the pretty much a standard format. Doesn't matter whether you're in Databricks, Synapse here, or using locally. It is always IPy NB. There are different versions of notebooks. So there is a new type of notebook called Marimo notebook, but that's a different thing altogether. It's a bit more advanced thing, version of the notebooks, much more interactive than this. But the nice thing about that is if I'm developing something here, download this. You can pretty much go to any other notebook provider, import that, and most of the time it should just work fine without any issues. We'll go to run. Well, there is not a whole lot, but connect, new and standard, and we'll look at this. What does that mean? But by default, it is always a standard session. Then we have PySpark notebook, or by default, it is always PySpark or Python notebook. Now you'll notice that there is a Python and then T-SQL. You can think about these as different engines within the notebook, or when you're running the notebook, by default, it is always the Spark engine that you are selecting. You can always choose Python, which is maybe what, a month old, and then T-SQL is also there, but T-SQL is, I want to say, maybe 6 months old, but Python is the latest thing. And we'll talk about also why Python is so cool and what is the difference between this Python and this Python. Then we have environment. If I pull this down, you'll see that it says workspace default, which I guess it tells us that there is something in the workspace that it is defaulting to. And then it also shows you runtime is 1.2, Spark 3.4, Delta 3 2.4, compute is medium 1 to 10 nodes. When we start talking about Spark, I'll explain what all of those things mean. But know that if you have multiple environments, you can choose. So when I went here and then selected Spark, that's the engine. But then, just like your computer, right? You can say I want to use this VM versus that VM. Think about it in that terms. That what is the compute and what is the runtime that you want to use. You can create your own environment and attach that to the notebook within which that compute will run. Then we go to edit. We'll look at that more. We'll also look at the run more a bit later, and then view. Okay, all good. When you first start, you will see that it is by default. When I hover over here, you have a code cell and a markdown cell. And the difference between the two is the code cell is where you're actually writing the code, and that is something that's executed. Python markdown cell, on the other hand, is something that is purely text. So if I go here and say markdown and then write something hyper and then shift enter, you will get it as a text. There is no Python, there is no R, there is no Spark, nothing of that sort. You do get nice functionality of being able to format this. So I can always highlight it and then do Control B, and it will make it bold. Now notice that when I do that, there is 2 stars and 2 stars, and that's because this is a markdown language. And there are certain things that you can do in markdown language. So let's say if I remove this 1 star and then remove 1 star here, it becomes italic, right? I can also, let's say if I do a high again, highlight that and then go underline, you will see that is under this U and U. You don't have to remember all of this stuff. So you can highlight it as well. So mark and say hi, and it will highlight it too. Nice thing about the markdown is that you can format the text. So these are some of the limited options you have. But then there are also multiple website markdown editor. Let's see, where you can easily, yeah, Dillinger is one of my favorites, where you get to see a lot more of this. And where this is super helpful is you can add stuff here and then preview it right away here. But where this is super helpful is when I'm creating documentation for my clients, which is very nice because when, at least for Power BI, for example, the documentation was always a challenge. But now with R gaps and with notebook integration with R gaps, I can create these markdown, include lots of stuff. I can add things in here. I can embed images as well. So let's see, for example, how do I move this part? Okay. And let me see if I can. I'm trying to launch my other window. Okay, there you go. Give me one sec. I'm just gonna maybe go to a picture of a dog. Okay, that looks like a cool dog. And then if what I'm going to do is grab it from one screen and then launch it here. Oh, this is asking me to upload now. Come on. But you can basically drag and drop in general, but you can also click on image and then provide a link to an image. And then let's see, copy image link, image URL, and that should work fine. You cannot attach, as far as I know, directly. So you cannot attach directly from like SharePoint and stuff. That would be really cool because many times you have logos and things like that that reside in SharePoint. If you have something in the Lakehouse, however, you can definitely embed that. So that is also very helpful. For the code cell, you have different options. When I go over here and then let's say first let's just do print hi. And when I do shift enter, notice that the first thing it will do is connecting. And then that should go on for maybe 4, 5, 6 seconds. And what it is doing now under the hood is launching a Spark cluster for us to use it. So it started in 11 seconds, launching the Spark cluster, and now it is running. The Spark cluster is running, and now the Python code is executed. If I want to change it to something else, I can always do that. So if I go to Spark R here, then I don't remember how you do hi in or print in Spark R or in R either. So not sure, but you can always change the language that you want here. So you don't have to rely on that. And you can dynamically do that. If you want to pass from Python to R, it's not as straightforward. You have two options. Either you can create temporary data frames and pass from one to the other, or there are packages. There is one called PyR, or there is one package called Reticulate that allows you to pass data frames between Python and R. But in general, I think that's a really a bad practice. You should really stick with one. 99.999% of the times, pretty much everybody is just going to use Python, which is good. When I go to a cell, you will see on the right-hand side a few more options here. So the first one is Markdown, that if I created this, but I want to convert this into a Markdown, so you can do that, and it will become a Markdown cell. Next one is a preview. That is when you are creating a Markdown cell, and if you want to see a preview, then you can do that. This is a lock cell that you don't want this to be. Imagine that you are converting this or you're editing this and this is somebody's, and you don't want to accidentally delete something or do any of that stuff. Then in that case, you can lock it down and it will not be editable. You can still run it, but you cannot edit it or delete it. On the other hand, there is a freeze sale button which if you click on that, it will freeze the cell. If you see this snowflake on the left hand side, so that freezes the cell, which means you cannot run that. So difference between this and this is lock is you're locking the cell down, you can't edit it, but you can run it. Whereas freeze cell is when you're freezing it, and you can't run it either, and you can't delete it either. So um, so how do I use this thing? Is let's say you have a long notebook and you want to just run the notebook without a few of the cells. Then it's a nice handy option where I just freeze the cell, run all, and it will run everything and skip anything that is frozen. Now, thing to remember in this case is uh, when you are developing the notebook, when you are developing something, it is okay to do that. But in your production code, you don't want to include any frozen cells. And the reason being, when you are doing the deployment from one environment to the other, dev to UAT, prod, and such, any frozen cells, they don't get carried over. So it's always a good idea that when you are developing, just during interactive run, it is okay to do that, but don't forget to unfreeze the cell or remove the cells that you don't need. If you don't want something, you can always comment it out. And commenting something out is just like a DAX editor, you can select the line and do control and forward slash, and it will add this ampersand to that. Is that ampersand? Yeah, or the hash to that, and it will comment that part. Again, to uncomment it, control and forward slash. That's very handy to just keep it in mind. Um, you can, when you click on these three, you'll see that there are some additional things that you can do. So if I have this high, so let's run this, and then I have another one. That's again, this is again another high. And usually, when I am developing, just to keep things isolated, just so that the code block is manageable, it is modular, I develop it in cells like this. But when I'm all done and when it is time to package it all together or to keep it into one cohesive code block, then I click on these three dots and then say merge with the previous cell, and it will merge the two cells together. You cannot, I don't think you can, let's see, you can always split the cell too, but that usually does not happen. So you can highlight what you want to split, where you want to split it at, and then you can split it. But majority of the times, or I don't even remember the last time I did a split cell. It's usually either merge with previous cell or merge with next cell. Um, it says here move cell up and move cell down, but a easier way to do that is to just grab this and then move it up and down, which is also handy. You don't have to do that. You can always do control and then move up and down too. So that works too. If you want to delete, then you can control select and then delete as well, and that should work too. Now, as I'm making all these changes, so let me just run this one more time. Now notice when I clicked on run again, it did not have to connect to any session, right? Because the session is already running. The thing to keep in mind here, the reason why it took 5, let's say 10, 11 seconds, right? Um, when you are connecting, so right now by default, it is a Spark compute that we are using. Fabric, in fact, let me see if I can open Fabric Spark architecture. If it is there. Fabric compute, let's see if this helps. So when we are using the Spark, There are things called as starter pools. Starter pools, think about all these data centers, and all these data centers, they have machines that are running 24/7. They don't go down, they, or ideally they shouldn't go down, and it is always running. When I click on connect the session, which was right here, the standard session, start a new session in standard session, this notebook is attached to one of the clusters that's already running, and that's why we are able to see such a low latency, and it's able to connect right away. You always pay when your fabric compute is always paid when you connect to a session, and not when when you start a session, and not when it is in the process of connecting to that Spark compute. So we have 11 seconds of time there. So that 11 seconds are not counted. It's only the meter starts as soon as it says session is ready and you're connected. Then it is connected to that Spark pool, and then the meter starts for your fabric consumption. um, I said that your Spark compute session starts, right? Now, one of the ways by default, if when I start something, it is consuming. So this is a trial capacity. So let's see the compute, like what are we actually connecting to, right? And the hint to that is really here, the workspace settings, runtime 1.2. But let's go over to the workspace settings, and then if I go to data engineering and go to Spark settings, and you'll see here that what am I connecting to? So uh, the thing that I showed earlier, where it says starter pools, nothing but means the default pool that has or that are always running. And so we can see what is the size of that starter pool. And when I click on this pencil here, you'll see it is a starter pool. Node size is medium. A medium node size in Fabric just means that in here, a medium node size here means that we are using 1 to 10 machines, and let's go down here where it will show that. Yeah, medium node size here means that we have up to 48 max number of nodes that are available, and the pool size is by default we have 8 cores that we are using, and 64 GB RAM is used for that. You can obviously change that. So let's say we want to change that. We go here and, well, sorry, we go click on this thing and say new pool. And let's say this is FPUIG, memory optimized. There is only one option, but then instead of the medium, I selected small here. And when I select small, what does that mean? That I'm getting, instead of 8 cores, now I'm using 4-core machine. So a node is nothing but a machine, and nothing more than that. So it is just you're just choosing. And why would that matter? Well, the reason why it matters is that is directly proportional to the capacity, fabric capacity that you are consuming. That you get for one CU is equal to, I believe, two cores, something like that. So which means that anytime you're running or attaching to that notebook and starting the default pool, you're already consuming 8 cores. Even if I just printed high, doesn't matter. Even if I run something that's more complicated, and as long as it is using those 8 cores and not scaling up, it is still going to be the same amount of compute. So if you're a Power BI developer and if you want to reduce your overall Fabric compute, then maybe a good idea is to use that a small node, and then start using that. The downside of that is, when the reason why we got that low latency and why we were able to connect to that pool right away within 5 to 11 seconds, because it was always running. When you create a custom pool, when you create something that is not by default, where I go here, click on this, and then create something that's a new pool, Now, when you're connecting to that pool, uh, Fabric will have to first create that and then provision it for you. So it is spinning up that VM. Think about the VM that is being provisioned for you, and then making it available, and then attaching that to your notebook. So which just means that instead of taking 5 to 11 seconds, it's going to take about, let's say, 2 to 3 minutes. Used to take 5 minutes, but that definitely has improved significantly. And going in the opposite direction, if you need more compute, then you can go to node size and select large, and then you'll get more memory and more compute based on that. When you create all of those things in the notebook itself, you will see all of those options pop up. So by default, this is the Fabric runtime, Fabric workspace setting. You can change that. But your administrator, workspace administrator, can also lock that down for you. So he can or she can also say that can somebody actually go there and customize the compute. So the option that you see here, customize compute configuration for notebooks, if I turn this off, then you cannot. When users cannot adjust that compute, and whatever they have provisioned at the workspace level will be used for by all the users within that environment, within that workspace. So if you are a Fabric admin or a workspace admin, this is a nice option, because then, and if you're concerned about how the compute is being used, you can just scale it down to a small size, turn this off, and now everybody will start using your default small node cluster. Okay. So that's that. Let's see what else. Toggle parameters. So these parameters are nothing but, let's see, if I say A is equal to 20 and then run this, now this A is assigned a value of 20. If I press A again, I get 20. But you can turn this into a parameter, toggle parameter cell, and now this is accessible for you to change it in the pipeline. And where this is helpful is let's say let's suppose I go to one of my lake houses, and imagine that I created properties, and let's just say I grab this icon or this file path, right? And let's say this file path is equal to this, and if I'm reading that table, turn this into a parameter, run this guy. Now, because this is a toggled parameter, in the pipeline itself, there is an option for base parameters where I can dynamically change that. So imagine like in Power BI world, right? Exactly the same thing. In Power BI world, we create the parameters, we publish it to Power BI service, and in service, we change stuff, right? Select 100 rows or change from this to this or change the data source exactly like that. So you can dynamically change that during runtime in the pipelines. When you are running it in the notebook, there is no difference. It doesn't matter. It's just when you're running it in the pipeline, these parameters can come in super handy. On the left-hand side here, I see Explorer, and there are two options here. One is the resources section, and then there are this data source section. The resources here, you can upload some stuff here. So you can always, I guess, upload things to your lakehouse. But lakehouse is more for your data, where when you're using the data and also large amounts of data. But if you want something that is more localized, then you can go to resources, click on new, upload, sorry, not folder, but upload files, and then I can select maybe a file or maybe even images. Let me see. Yeah, this Python, for example, I can upload that and then I can grab it, drop it, and then you can use it right way like this. Where this is helpful is if you have an R file or a Python file that somebody has shared with you, or maybe something that you have created, you can upload that to the built-in section, and then you can start using that. Nice thing about that is when you're deploying it from one environment to the other environment, it will go with it. It attach. It's considered as a part of the notebook itself. So when you say, "Hey, access this particular file," it will always know that based on the relative path that there is a built-in section, and I need to get the file from there and then use that. So think about it as small storage. I think it is like 50 MB or something. I could be wrong on that, but this is not meant to be used for like uploading large amounts of data. Small files here and there, maybe configuration files, py files, stuff like that. That should not be part of a lake house or should not be exposed to your users. So that's where the resources section comes in. Lake houses, pretty self-explanatory. You can add a lake house, and that allows you to access data that we will look at later. And then warehouses, you can add a warehouse. It says warehouse, but think about it as a SQL endpoint. It doesn't have to be a warehouse. So every lake house has a SQL endpoint, SQL Analytics endpoint. So you can add that, and when I switch over to the T-SQL notebook, you'll be able to start working with that. You can use a T-SQL to query the data from where you have from the data source that you have applied there. Okay. In the top here, then we have comments, history, and develop. So I'll touch upon those, and then we'll move over to semantic link. So comments part is something is meant to be really used for like collaboration purposes, where you are collaborating with your users, right, or other developers, and they can add comments. So again, the high stuff that I added, I can right click and say add new comment and say hi, and it stays with it, so you can trail it. But the way I like to use it is if I have a very, excuse me, very long notebook, and if I want to jump to a particular code cell, then that becomes super handy, because this is not only tied to a code cell, but it is actually tied to a particular line of code as well. So if I copy this part, see, and add a code cell here, highlight this and new code, and this is high 2. And let's say if I turn this off, or let's say if I go here, I can directly go jump over to that. So notice this, when I'm clicking on the comments here, it jumps to the respective comment or code a block or the highlighted code here. And I like to use this as a hack kind of a thing, where I'm developing something, and I leave notes for myself that, hey, I need to do something here, or is this correct, and all that. And then I keep adding comments here, so it is easier for me to just jump back and forth between different comments, different lines, and things like that. So I think it's probably not the intended use case, but that's how I like to use it. The history is very brand new, and this is for it keeps the live version of the notebook. So this is current, whereas this, it just shows you like what are the changes that have been added. You can restore back to this, and it will restore back to what it was a few back to where it was. So I'll go to this, keep this version, and it will go back to this. So history is pretty new. And then develop here is run only, edit, view only, very self-explanatory. When you have more people who, so if I had given, if I had shared this with a perv, he would be able to come in here and then start editing and then make the changes. One thing that was very confusing to me, which thinking back, maybe it is not as confusing, but when he joins me, he starts his own compute session. So he's not using my compute. So essentially, right now I'm using 8 cores, and I'm consuming equivalent of eight, let's say 8 cores. When perf joins and he starts executing or connects to this notebook, it will be 8 plus 8, um, which is you're consuming more capacity basically. So that's at a very high level how what the notebook the anatomy of the notebook is. And Perv, if there are no additional questions, maybe I can move over to semantic link and we can discuss that. Any
I,
questions or any comments?
yeah, I have one. There was one from Fernando at the start of this call, as you start the session.
Hmm.
He said it's not as much of a question, but a comment. He said, today he realized that my environment I created and added the semantic link lab library got blanked out. The library
You got
was not there.
deleted.
He said the library was not there anymore and I had to re-add it.
That is not uncommon. So I've heard that before as well, and that is an issue or a bug. That has happened to me as well, where you create the environment, you add a library, and for some reason, when you go back, it is not there. So, yeah, I mean, either create a support ticket for that, but not the first time that I've heard that,
I
unfortunately.
Yeah, I have a couple of very tiny little questions because I don't live in this world. The one
Hmm.
thing you mentioned, when you have a different cells and you have a PySpark and you can switch between different like R or all the stuff, and you said changing between those is not a common practice. Have you ever seen or your experience where you have to change like you're doing some stuff in notebook and then you have all PySpark and all of a sudden you have to use R for whatever reason?
So it is common to go between Spark SQL and Python. Maybe
Mhm,
it is also very common to go among these three, where
mhm,
you're using Python and maybe some bit of Scala and Spark SQL. I would say 99.9% of the times it is between PySpark and Spark SQL. And the
I
reason
see.
for that is you are developing in Python here, and now you just want to use SQL because it is easier or it is easier to refactor, or you already have SQL and then you want to use SQL, right? In that case, you can just jump over to Spark SQL, essentially exactly the same compute. There is no difference in terms of runtime. It follows the exact same query plan, so there is no difference whatsoever. It's just that what flavor are you using? Are you using Python or are you using Spark SQL?
I
As
see.
for Spark R, I have never seen that. I don't even know any people who use Spark R. People who use R, but Spark R, never ever heard
I
of
see.
that before.
Okay. And one last question on pool. You mentioned that by default it has a starter pool which it comes with, which is a what is on the workspace, and your other workspace can have a separate pool as well, right? You can have a pool is basically dependent on the workspace you're working on.
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
right, and then you mentioned that you can, of course, switch to the smaller pool because it will it will have a less capacity usage, your fabric capacity. Is there any blanket set? Let's say I never had a need for medium pool or the starter pool, which comes by default. I always want to be small pool rather than going and each workspace I have to change it because by default it will be a starter pool. Is there any tenant wide setting where you can say, okay, you know what, this should be my no, right? So it
No.
basically the new workspace always come with the starter pool, but there is nothing
Correct.
you can. Okay, I see.
Nothing
Okay,
you can do that. So if
okay,
the only way that you can do that is if I scroll down here, so this patch, the workspace, and this get notebook ID, and then this one, client.patch Spark settings. And then this will, for that specified workspace, it will patch the workspace setting where you can specify like what exactly that's exactly what I'm doing here. That here I'm saying that, hey, use the environment, this and this, they're exactly the same thing where you are able to attach, enable, see, there you go, customize compute enabled. So you can enable it or change it programmatically for all workspaces. And that would probably be the best way to handle that, where you're programmatically changing it, and then you're also disabling customize configuration for items and disable this part. And now all the workspaces will always have that. But when you create it for the first time, it will always default to a medium notebook or medium pool. Uh, and a default pool which uses the medium node and use that. So there is nothing you can do about that.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So that now brings us to semantic link. So this is all good. Like, what is the notebook and what are some of the features? One thing that I want to maybe also should talk about, just for the sake of completion, is on the right side you have all these options, right? On the left side you also have few options that not many people use, which is, and I use it very often, where run all above this cell. So if I have a very long notebook and I'm iterating over the code block, then either like just run below this, so it will only run those ones, or above that, or you can also select stuff and then click on run selected, and then it will just select or run whatever is highlighted, which is also neat because then you are not executing the entire code block or the entire code cell, just running something that is highlighted. So that can be very handy as well.
And to add to that, just quickly,
Hmm.
which I learned through Twitter at some point of time, when you select the a code in the cell, you can use the shortcut Control Shift Enter to run
Correct.
selected code,
Correct.
right?
Yes, you can do
Instead
that.
of through the menu or
Yep,
selected.
you can do that, and you also have few more options when you select something. So if I select this, right click, then you have a couple of more options. So one, or let me just first talk about this. So let's say I have hi here, right, and I want to change all the highs to hello. I can always select it, go here, change all occurrences, and say hello. Or now I have ELLO and I want to change all these ELLO, or maybe in the few of these, I can always alt select stuff wherever I want the cursor and then change that to. So that is also possible. And where this is helpful is when you have a code block and then you want to add, let's say, comments or comment out certain things, or you've done something and you're importing or using it from somewhere else. In those cases, this is super, super helpful where you are just selecting stuff and then you are adding it, based on that. Okay. So that brings us to semantic link. Now, as a Power BI developer, even before Fabric was a thing, I always use Python because Python is my favorite thing. It allows you to explore the data, allows you to do a lot of stuff that otherwise is not possible. But semantic link pretty much changed everything, like how we as Power BI developers interact with the semantic model. I've given plenty of sessions on semantic link, but let's just recap that what are some of the things that you can do using semantic link. By default, in your Fabric environment, both in Python and PySpark, you can semantic link is installed, so you don't have to install anything. So this is a new session that I'm creating. If I go here, click on this, it will import senpai.fabric as fabric. All this is saying is that senpai is the library, and from Senpai, there is this class called Fabric, and we are just importing this as Fabric. It doesn't have to be Fabric. I can say import Senpai.fabric as Sandeep, and it won't mind that. This is just a short form, like, what do I, instead of saying every time Senpai.fabric, I'm just calling that as Fabric. Once you do that, you are able to do a lot of cool stuff that otherwise is not possible. So I can get a list of all the data sets um, that are within the workspace. Now notice here that when I do that, it gave me two data sets, right? So if I go to Fabric Pug, there are a couple of data sets in here, pretty much the default data set. Yeah, the default data set, which is this semantic model here, right? So I got that. Um, Now, watch what happens if I attach a lake house here. So let's just go ahead and attach a lake house that is in another workspace. I'll have to stop the session and then rerun this because the lake house is attached. So let's go ahead and run that, and then should again take 5 to 11 seconds. So it started, imported, and now if I do the fabric dot list datasets, it's running. By the way, when you are running something, you can always click on this and it will take you to the cell where it is running currently. And notice that I didn't change anything, but now I have a lot more than just two data sets that I was seeing earlier. Any guesses why that is happening? Well, the reason is in this case, I attached a lake house, and you may wonder, well, what does that have to do with this? The reason for that is when I go here, and let me show you something. If I go to fabric dot get workspace ID, oh, let me first run this. Okay, dot get underscore workspace, and you'll see that there are two options here: get workspace ID and get notebook workspace ID. By default, whenever in any of the SemPy functions, when you don't specify anything, it uses this get workspace ID, which is the workspace ID of the default lakehouse. So when I added the lakehouse was in a different workspace, and it returned the workspace of that default lakehouse. And that default lakehouse or that workspace, this is where it's coming from. If you want to list the workspace, you want to use the current workspace, then you have to either manually specify that hey, fabric.list datasets, and the workspace that I want to use is a specific workspace, let's say sales workspace, and then it will give me the datasets from the sales workspace. Um, or the other option, to make it more dynamic, is you can use fabric.get workspace ID of the notebook that I'm using. And that will override whatever lakehouse you have. And always use the lakehouse or always use the workspace of the notebook where it resides. And why this is super helpful is because when you are using SemPy or a lot of the other uh, functions, when you deploy the notebook from dev to UAT to prod on each of these environments, you will likely have different workspace lake houses that are attached, or you're iterating over the list of data sets that are within that workspace, right? This way, this is dynamic. As you move from one environment to the other environment, it will always pull the data or give you the data from that specific workspace where the notebook resides and not from something else. So just something to keep in mind. So that was list function. If I go here and then look at fabric.list, you'll see that there are a ton of other functions, right? So another one that is super helpful is list items. And when I go here, list items, it will give you the list of all the fabric items that are within that notebook. And as long as you have access to other workspaces, you can use it for other items as well. Another thing I guess to notice here is fabric dot list datasets. Um, and if I want to know more about this function, I can always add a question mark and then shift run, shift enter, and then you will see a couple of different options here. So let's talk about the first one here. Mode is XMLA. By default, when you create a Fabric workspace, it's premium, so it has XMLA, so it works fine. If I try to use this on, let's say, a non-premium workspace, which do I have one? Yes, I do EAM. And let's see if that works on this. And if I say um, workspace is equal to EAM and run that, let's see if this works. It does not work. And the reason for that is because it says I don't have permission, because it by default it uses the XMLA endpoint of that workspace that you're attaching. If you want to override that, then I think you go by mode is equal to REST, and then it will connect using the REST endpoint. If you want to make it more flexible so that you get uh, uh, you can use it across the board for everything. You should always use the mode is equal to REST. It will work on the other workspaces too, whether it is XMLA, non-XMLA, or premium, non-premium, whatever, and you can do that. When I specified list data sets, let's go back to the default here, and let's just say workspace is equal to cells. So I'll get all the. Notice that I got 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Only 4 data sets back. If I look at the function that is here, there are a couple of different other options. So the other one is this additional XMLA properties. And if I look at the additional XMLA properties, go to this link and then look at this, that what are the additional XMLA properties. You'll see that these are the additional XMLA properties that you can also get for that one, that for all the data sets. So let's pick maybe Per's favorite, which is um, calculation groups. So where is calculation groups? Control F, calculation group. Well, calculation group is not. But delete click behavior, default more. Let me see what else is there. Let's say culture, for example. Okay, so I'll go here. I'll copy this guy, additional XMLA properties, and here again, workspace is equal to sales, and XMLA properties is equal to let's say culture, and then enter, and this will give me this will add culture to that. Now in this case there is no culture added, but this is super helpful when you want to get more XMLA properties that are defined in here, and you can always give it a list as well. So I could add culture, and then let's say if I pick something else, both of those, let's say collation, and though both of those will be added and returned to you. So that's a nice way of getting additional XMLA properties from if something is non-standard. The get functions, I guess we talked about that if I have fabric.get, then you will get a lot of the other things as well. Now, again, like I said, where this is super helpful is for your fabric workloads um, when you want to get um, when you want to get like lakehouse IDs or make more your workloads more dynamic. So what I mean by that is, let's say, um, so let me go here and say my lakehouse name is Vancouver, right? So let's go to lakehouse name. Oh, this is the lakehouse name. So get lakehouse ID. So this will return nothing because I don't have anything. But if you want to get the lakehouse ID of the default lakehouse that is added, then it will return that. Where this thing is super helpful is if you want to dynamically again create your ABFS path to get the data. The name of the lake house, you always know that, but then to get you get the lake or the workspace ID of the notebook it is in. You dynamically create your ABFS path, so as it moves from one environment to the other environment, you're automatically getting the data that you want. Next one is the create functions. Um, you can create workspaces and notebooks, but then lake houses, I've never, I don't use it. I have blogs on this topic, but yeah, I don't really use that. Which brings us to the Power BI part of it, where you want to get or work with the Power BI semantic model. So let's say I have DS is customer profitability. I use this, and this is probably going to error out because it is output is hidden. Because the workspace it is not in the current workspace. Same thing again that we talked about. If I again go to list tables, where is it? Oh, I know. ARIA ID. It will give me the list of tables that are in this one specific data set. Similar to what I showed you above, I can always go and then question mark and do this to get additional properties. One thing that you should know again is extended properties. This one is also super helpful, where I can go extended properties is equal to true, and it will give me additional properties like row count. Or anything else that is not included in here, the additional XML properties, just like how I showed you earlier. You can add that and you'll get all of those things in here. Same thing, won't repeat it again, but list columns again for each of these. If you want to get a list of columns, you'll get that. This is also, you can also get list of relationships. So workspace is equal to read, and I can plot the relationship. Now, how I have used this for my client, where this is helpful, is I guess you can, one obvious one is cataloging. But beyond that, for my current client, what I'm doing is before they publish from one environment to the other environment, I get the list of relationships, and then I scan if are there any many-to-many relationships, are there any bidirectional relationships, are there any one-to-one relationships, are there any relationships where there are RI violations and things like that, and that I can scan during deployment and then flag that and stop the deployment if any of those are detected. It could be intentional, or this is a nice guardrail for those who for developers who don't have much experience with Power BI, or maybe for citizen developers, where you want to make sure that they don't create something that is not a good practice. We want good, nice star schema. This still won't, many to one doesn't mean that it is nice, but at least it means that you're not doing super bad things. So it's at least, one way of providing guardrails to your users. You can also use create more functions that are not available out of the box, and create things that are, well, this did not work because I did not include a workspace in my in here, and I wonder if I can change that automatically. But the reason why this did not work is space is equal to workspace data set, and let's see if this works. Yeah, anyhow, I have a blog on this, but the idea here is that if there is something that is not available, but you can obviously create the Python functions and do that. The what this particular function does is it scans the um, it scans a data set or all the data sets that are within a workspace and gives you things like are there any calculated columns? What is the total size of the calculated column? Just like the BPA. Um, but a smaller version of the BPA, best practices analyzer, so that you can get at a very high level understanding of are there any optimizations that you can do for the semantic model to reduce the overall size, improve the performance, and things like that. I have a blog on this, so check it out. Um, Check that out. Semantic Link Labs, anything that is not part of Semantic Link is covered by Semantic Link Labs, which is a open source library, Python library by Michael Kowalski, who I don't know if he even sleeps. He is pushing out new versions of Semantic Link Labs like pretty much every day. He pushed one out yesterday, and he told me this morning he has published another one this morning based on the feedback that he got. So right now it is on version 8.11. But Link Labs is pretty awesome. A lot of the stuff that you cannot do in Semantic Link, such as um, BPA or Vertipack can be done inside of Semantic Link Lab. So let me just show you real quick that what is possible so you can appreciate the stuff that he has put together. Any questions, Perv, while I'm showing that?
Yes, there is one question from Fernando. Is there a difference if the semantic model is in composite mode and has direct query tables? When you were talking, I think talking about the list of tables. Maybe Fernando, if you want to add more to that.
Yes, if list dot tables if extended true shows the count of rows. If it's in direct query, till the function delivers the result, or it's would be 0.
Yeah, so it will not do that because the rows in this case are it gets it from the DMV. So it will not do that. In fact, there is a function um, in Semantic Link Labs where you can specify if you want to get the rows or not, because it can have an adverse impact on direct link. In case of direct link, if you do that, direct link, as you know, it when direct link is framed, there is no data inside of the semantic model, right? So even if you use the DMV, you won't see anything. But if you run it, it is going to use the DMV and it is going to cache all the columns for all the tables, which we don't want. So in case of Semantic Link Labs, there is a function that automatically goes and then queries the SQL endpoint and then gives you the result back. So to your point, yes, it will show it as 0 because if the DMV can't show it, then it can't show it.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, and then in labs, you can go and then look at labs, and then you'll see there are like ton of different functions that are available, where it says create ABFS path, and then create environment, event stream, KQL, everything. The thing that I guess for us, what is important is labs dot uh, either Vertipack, let's say, Vertipack Analyzer, and in this case again, dataset is DS, and workspace is equal to area ID, and that should scan that and give us the Vertipack result. We'll take a couple of minutes here, but this is exactly, well, I shouldn't say exactly the same. There are certain differences, slight differences between the Vertipack analyzer that you use in DAX Studio and the Vertipack analyzer that you use here in Labs. But when you do that, click on Model Summary, and you get a nice summary of all the things here. You can export this out and then save it. So I actually am doing that for my current client, where I analyze semantic models that are in production using Vertipack Analyzer. And then I have certain rules, just like BPA, but some additional rules that I've created based on what is in the Vertipack Analyzer, and that helps the client figure out during production, after it has moved to production, or during deployment, if there are any issues that they should think about, and are there any optimizations that can be done. I won't show here or go in the details, but check out labs. There are also BPA that you can create, your best practice analyzer. You can save it to a lake house, create nice reports on top of that. So very, very powerful tool. It's one of the game changers, in my opinion, for Power BI developers in Fabric. And then lastly, something that you should know about is the notebook utils, where so if you go to notebook utils, and then look at notebooks utils, well, which one should I show? Notebook utils dot, let's say, lakehouse. So if I go to notebook utils dot lakehouse and then go to help, you will see a ton of different functions that are available within that. You can get create, you can get, if I use get, so let's say this is notebook utils and dot get, and if I use get is equal to Vancouver, I will get the properties of that lake house. Where this is again helpful is that the dynamic parameterization that I talked about, where I can access now the properties of the lake house very easily, which is super helpful during development. Because again, when you are, let's say this is your ABFS path, right, and you want to get access all the tables that are within this lake house, and the lake house name is same across all the environments. Now you can dynamically get the ABFS path, and that helps you access the data irrespective of which environment you are in. So that makes it super dynamic. There are a ton of other functions that are within notebook utils. The easiest way to know all of that is if you go to dir and then notebook utils, like directory notebook utils. Here, directory notebook utils, you will see all the different functions that are available. So you have UDF, runtime, prepare, MS Spark utils, lakehouse, and all this. So the ones that I use the most is notebook. Then I use runtime, and then I use the lakehouse, because that is very helpful. So while we are on that, let me just show you one that if you have not used it, notebookutils.notebook.exit is very important. This one exits the notebook, and then notebook with a value. And why this is helpful is, so my current client, for example, we talked about like the this stuff over here, right? So let's imagine that maybe for one of the tables, I look at the overall size, and the overall size is let's say I don't know 8 GB, right? For one particular model. I can extract that, assign that to a variable, and then I can exit that from here to say notebook notebook.exit, and then whatever that value is, right? Pass that variable here, and then in your pipeline, let's go to pipeline. In your pipeline, you can actually access that uh, access that value by going to when you run this notebook. um, in the output of the notebook, you will see the exit value. I can add another, let's say, if statement here. Where is an if statement? Uh, Small and activities. If condition. So I can add an if condition, and then I can catch that when I see that if condition. So let's say if I go right here and activities, so here I add dynamic content, and then here you will see that I can access the exit value. So this dot I think it is result dot exit value, and then click on OK. Now, whatever that exit value was from that notebook, it will pass to that, and I can use that to say if the value is greater than whatever 10 gigabytes, then I can add a email message here, right? Or I can add an email here or create a Teams alert, and that is super handy because then not only I made that more dynamic, but this is more actionable as well, that I'm creating something. It doesn't have to be one exit value. You can have like create a JSON with multiple exit values and then create multiple conditions within here to say if this happens, send an alert, and all that. So it can get very complex and very intelligent very soon. Okay, so that is on semantic link. Perv, how much time do we have?
How much time you need? We are already 20 minutes after 7. So I don't
Okay.
know how much time you need to cover. We can go.
Um, well, I just want to talk about like the Python notebook
Okay.
for a minute because that is, I think, very important, at least for Power BI developers. So the difference between the PySpark and the Python notebook is PySpark, like what we talked about, is so here, and let me go this thing. When you switch over to, so this is PySpark, and when I go over to Python, the difference between the two is PySpark is distributed computing, meaning you have multiple machines that you are provisioning to process the data, large amounts of data, the big data in parallel, which is super helpful if when you have large amounts of data because now you have more compute. Like the stuff that we talked about earlier here, where we were in compute. Let's go. We were here in compute and we're auto scale and dynamic allocation. So what's happening is when you have Spark, it will start with one machine. So which is this one machine. If the driver and the manager, the cluster manager, it senses that there are some pending tasks, that it needs more resources. It will add another machine, and then it will also add more cores overall. So we start with single node, single machine, and then we have 8 cores on that machine. So you'll be using 8 cores. You have more jobs or your more tasks. It will add another machine to that automatically for you, manage all the resources, and then use all the cores or some of the cores on that machine. If that is not sufficient, it will add, keep doing that until it reaches 10. Well, you can always go up to 16 here and use that. But total, you can get up to 16 multiplied by 15, whatever that number is, 480. I don't know what that number is, but that many you can parallelize it for large amounts of data up to that. On the opposite end of that, like you asked about, like, what if I don't want that, right? I don't need, and for Power BI developers, you'll probably won't need all that compute. In that case, you can go over to Python, and if I start Python, you will see on the bottom left here where you will see that it is 2 cores only. So 2 cores and 16 GB. So if you want to use just SymPy, Semantic Link, or Semantic Link Labs, don't want to consume all the Fabric resources. Maybe you have only 100 rows, 1,000 rows, or even maybe 10,000 or up to a million rows. Not a ton, right? In those cases, Python is a super good option, and you're not losing on a ton of stuff either. So you can start with pandas. One thing that I did not show here is, if you are new to all of this, you can go to Browse Code Snippets under Edit, and you will see here some of the stuff that we talked about. So one thing here is, let's say if I go to Lakehouse Interaction, and then we look at read data from Lakehouse here, and then I can click on insert, and it will insert some code snippets for you. So let's say I have this Lakehouse. I go here, and I want to access this one particular table, right? So let's say nation table. I can go copy this path, go here, put it here, and now I'm getting only a few, let's say, rows, and run this guy, and then we should see the table that we are looking for. And I get 10 rows back, and that was pretty fast. But this table that I have on the left-hand side is line item. This is 600 million rows, right? And if I try to use the method that's given here, let me just change something so that I can demo that. And let's say I change this to line item. And now watch what happens. If I run this guy, keep an eye on the bottom left here, you will see that the core utilization jump up to 57%. RAM is also slowly going up, 41%. The CPU utilization is already at 100%. And the RAM that I have here is 16 gig, 77 gig, 77%. And I guess you can see where this is going, right? This is going to crash. So which is where PySpark helps, where you won't run into those issues. But even with Python, there are options for you to use certain libraries within Python Notebook where you can still keep your overall resource consumption to minimum, and then still use that. And the reason why this is happening right now is because we are using pandas, which is single threaded, meaning all those 600 million rows are cached in memory, which is about 40 gigs, whereas our RAM is 16 gig. So it crashed, and it's not working for us. So to avoid that from happening, so I wrote a blog last week, but there is a library called Polars. So pandas, polars, like all the animal names, right? You can use polars. So let me go to polars, and let's say I copy this path. And now if I do pl.scan delta, and yeah, use that thing. And now notice that it is, sorry. So this is the table path, and if I do the table path, now this should be like split of a second right away, um, because we are actually not getting the data. Just like Spark, which is lazy, it doesn't load the data until you ask it to do something. Polars is also doing exactly the same thing. It is not giving us the data, it is just connecting to this delta table. And then we're just scanning it, not reading the whole thing. And then I can look at, let's say, limit, let's say 10, and then dot collect. Now, what this is doing is going to that delta table, getting only 10 rows from that delta table, and then collecting it to on the machine, and then showing that. So even though the size is very large, we are able to work with large data frames. Doesn't matter. There is also an option to use a DuckDB, or you can use Polars. Look at the blog that I shared here, where I talk about how to use this with um, Python notebook with polars, where I show how to read the tables, write the tables using polars. So if you're using Python notebook, you're using SymPy, you're accessing all the semantic model, getting all the metadata and all that, and you want to save it to a lakehouse, polars is pretty good option. Since we are running out of time, I won't go into the details here. But the only thing that I want to say is there is a way, like, let's say, for example, you are working with this table, right? And this is line item table, but you want to make it very scalable, where you want to go from Python notebook to PySpark notebook, and develop the code. Polars won't work in PySpark notebook. It will, but you're not getting, it is not Spark. So how can you go from Python notebook, develop something in Python notebook, so you're only consuming 2 cores, and then maybe you want to scale it up to hundreds of nodes? How can you do that? So I figured out a way on how to do that. So I'll be publishing a blog on that tomorrow, perhaps. But the idea here is I can dynamically figure out what environment I am in, whether it is PySpark and or Python, and then during runtime I can figure that out, and then it will use whatever engine that I should be using based on that. So keep an eye out on that for tomorrow. So I'll be publishing the blog tomorrow on that. Okay, I know that was a lot, went over the time by quite a bit margin, but hopefully it was we even did not even scratch the surface. There is a ton of other things that maybe in a future session I can show. Per
Mute. So that was quite a cool stuff, though. But I just want, I know there's a lot. But one thing I can share from my own experience. I've been a Power BI in the world for all of my life since Power BI started. But last couple of months, I started using PySpark. Of course, in the your blog post was super helpful. And prior to those SymPy and the Fabric notebooks and all the stuff, if I have to do those things in the past, I probably have to use many different technologies, Power Automate, some other gazillion things. But now it made everything become so easy. And for me, especially not coming from the background of um, a Python or PySpark, but still it was easy enough. There was a little bit of a learning curve. There's no doubt about that. Like what is import, when to import, when not to import, those kind of like stuff. But once I get over that, I think it really was super, super useful. And I'm using it now. It's like from, for me, the biggest use case is from the administration, governance, and
100%.
monitoring perspective. I don't do all of the cool stuff you do, but I think that made my life very easier. with this all
I mean,
this.
all the stuff that we used to do using PowerShell, like all of that
Exactly.
pretty much can be done using Python and notebooks. And I think the one of the best things about all of this is with PowerShell. So you had the ability to use Python before, right? But you had to create service principal, which meant that as a self-service business user, if you're working in a small organization, you have to go to IT. Hey, can I create service principal? Give me access to Azure and do this and that. And the answer was no, you can't do that. You know, in this case, all of that complexity is taken away.
Yeah.
It basically knows who you are, what accesses you have, what you can do, cannot do, based on the roles that have been assigned to you, and it respects that, right? So, which is huge,
Yeah.
and I think that is probably one of the game changers with respect to being able to use it, and not having to do that. As far as the learning curve, I agree with you on that. That Python is new. What I will say, um, I started working with Microsoft on the Trident. I don't know, back when in 2021, 2021, 2020 or 2021, when they were thinking about it. Um, and that is, if you go back and look at like when I started talking more about Python, was exactly at that point, because I was like, this is going to be the way how Power BI developers are going to use, or they have to learn Python, right? I was using Python even before then, but then I was more vocal, um, as to why they should do it and what are the use cases of doing it. And I will say all India stuff, right? But I will say that the second inflection point is now. If you have not learned Python before, just because of some things that are in the pipeline and how what you can do and all of that, as a Power BI developer, then the best time is now, because then you can do that will be a distinguishing factor as to who can use Python and do a lot of the stuff that you were not able to do, and now what you are able to do with it. So I would say if you have not learned, start using Python, start learning, reach out to me. I can share more resources with you as well with the people that we have here. And it's very basic stuff. Just like I'm not a PowerShell expert, right? But just like PowerShell and C Sharp in Tabular Editor, I look at the patterns like, oh, this is how you do it, and then Python you do exactly the same way, right? This is okay. This is how you do it. You save all that stuff, and then just reuse it. There is no shame in just copying and pasting. And then plus with Chat GPT, you can probably do anything you can dream of, right? So
Totally agreed. Yeah. Anybody have any comments? Yeah, I'm enjoying it. I learned a lot
No,
last 6 months. Your blog post been very useful.
yeah,
yeah. No, this is great. I mean, I just all the little tips you were showing along the way, I had no idea all that stuff was in there. Little code snippets, the comments, all that fun stuff.
excellent. Anything So those of you who are not using Python or are new to Python, anything that's holding you back, or any questions like Perv asked, right? What is a node, and what does it mean that when you are doing it, what exactly is happening? And while I'm here, feel free to ask those questions. We're all learning here, right? So if there are things that don't make sense, any terminology that maybe you don't understand, that what does it mean, or things that maybe you should be doing, not doing from orchestration perspective as well, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, we are all good.
Yeah. Well, I think you answered it already, but the Python option instead of using the Spark for things like running SemPy and stuff, that seems like it's an obvious thing. You're not doing heavy compute, you're just calling APIs. So
Correct.
you don't need to be firing off Spark stuff to do it.
Yeah, and especially for small stuff. And that was the whole point of the blog that I wrote, that how can you use row groups and all that. That One benefit of using Spark is you have a lot of cool stuff that the product team has baked in, that as a user you don't have to worry about, like the view order. It automatically optimizes the table for you, so it is nice for direct link. It is compressed and in all that. If you use Python notebook, then it is vanilla Python. You don't get all those nice optimizations and all the nice things that they have been doing, but that there are trade-offs. If you are just getting a list of all the data sets from a workspace, then it doesn't make sense to fire up the PySpark notebook and consume 8 nodes, right? Or rather,
Right.
eight
Yeah.
cores. It doesn't make sense at all. So in those cases, in fact, for my client that I'm working on right now, my job is to create the governance and data mesh architecture, get all the metadata, create BPA and all that stuff. For them, I'm using Python notebook 100%, saving everything using Python notebook. The difference is significant because they like it, because I'm saving a ton of fabric compute for them, the capacity units for them. Now, the where it does not work is when you want to scale up, when you have ton of data, millions of data points and rows. Then how do you do that? There is no good answer to that. But for data engineering, 100%, you should start with PySpark. But for something that is not data engineering related, very small stuff, data exploration, um, Python notebook makes a lot of sense. And in fact, that's what the intention was from the product group as well. That what they heard from the customers was, well, Fabric is new for us, like for as a Power BI customer, right? Fabric is new for us. We don't know what Spark is, but when my developer, Power BI developer, when they fire off a Spark notebook, they may create a bad join and then it will consume all the capacity, right? They are loading billions and billions of rows, and now my Fabric capacity is down. So what is a better option? Well, here is a Python notebook, and you can ask your Power BI developers to, let's say, use Python notebook so you're not consuming that capacity. And that was the whole intention behind providing that. So you have a lightweight compute option available in Fabric.
Yep. Cool.
Well, a lot of good stuff. Thanks, Sandeep. I surely learned a lot and using it. I'm actually using it, to be very honest. I'm using it in my real world. It's not just for the sake of doing it. I'm actually using it, which speaks in itself. Awesome. So we have another session next year, which we're trying to do with James for quite a bit now, but he is presenting us on January 30th. It will be, again, because he is in UK, it will be 8 a.m. and he's going to all talk about all things. He'd live in that maps and all that stuff.
Yeah, this is super cool stuff.
We're going to see what happens. It's on January 30th next year. That's start of the year. So if you guys are planning your holidays and all the stuff for next year's, James is gonna walk over all his maps and all that stuff. So we're gonna see. That's always an interesting area, and so that's our next session. Again, I shared the link to the feedback form, and the purpose of the form is not to collect your personal information or any marketing stuff. Sandeep and I are not into that kind of business. It's more about what Sandeep talked today, how much you liked it. I think the most core component out of that form is to get what kind of sessions you're looking for, because Sandeep and I are always looking for some opportunities, what topics make more sense for everyone in the community, to what we need to learn, right? So that's the core reason for that feedback form, nothing more than that. So thanks everyone for joining, but if you have
Thanks
more
again,
questions,
everyone,
we can stay.
and happy holidays.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Appreciate
Take
it.
care. See you guys next
Bye-bye.
year. Take care. Thanks,
Thanks.
Fernando.
Yep.
Take care.
Happy New
Bye
Year.
now. Bye.
Thanks, guys.